Can I ask you something? Have you ever met someone for the very first time and within just few seconds, you felt like you already knew them and what they were like? Maybe you thought they seemed kind, or I don't think I can trust this person. Perhaps you decided someone was confident, arrogant, intelligent, or friendly even before they finish introducing themselves. Now, here is the surprising part. Most of us like to believe we don't judge people too quickly. We tell ourselves that we are open minded, fair, and willing to give everyone a chance. But psychology tells a slightly different story. The truth is, your brain starts forming impressions of people almost immediately. In many cases, it happens before you are even aware of it. So today, I want us to explore why that happens. Because once you understand it, you will not only understand other people better, you will understand your mind a little better too. Welcome to Psychology Compass, where we unravel mysteries behind human behavior. I'm really glad you are here. Every week, we explore the psychology behind everyday thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, not to judge ourselves or others, but to understand why we do things we do. Now, imagine this. You're walking down a quiet street at night and you notice someone you've never seen before walking towards you. Before they've said a single word, your brain started asking questions. Are they safe? Should I be cautious? Can I relax? Notice something interesting. Your brain isn't trying to be rude. Rather, it is trying to keep you alive. Psychologists often explain this by saying our brains are designed to make rapid social judgments. That sounds technical, but the idea is actually very simple. Your brain is constantly collecting tiny pieces of information and making its best guess about what they might be, what they might mean. Think of it like reading the first page of a book and trying to predict how the story will end. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're completely wrong. But your brain will rather make a quick guess than to have no guess at all. Thousands of years ago, this ability helped our ancestors survive. They didn't have hours to carefully analyze whether a stranger might be dangerous. They had seconds. So the human brain evolved to make incredibly fast decisions based on limited information. The interesting thing is that we still have that same brain today, though the world has changed. But our psychology hasn't changed nearly as much. Here is another question. Have you ever met someone who looked serious and you immediately assumed they were unfriendly? Then, after talking to them for a while, for a few minutes, you discover they were one of the warmest people you've ever met. Or perhaps you met someone who seemed charming at first, only to realize later that that first impression wasn't accurate. It happens more often than we would like to admit. Psychologists call one reason for this the halo effect. Don't let the name fool you. It's actually a very simple idea. The halo effect happens when one positive quality influences how we see everything else about a person. For example, if someone is well dressed, speaks confidently, we might also assume they are intelligent, trustworthy, or successful, even though we don't actually have evidence for those conclusions. Our brain connects dots that aren't necessarily connected. The opposite too can happen. If someone appears nervous, tired, awkward, we may unfairly assume they are less capable or less confident. One small observation becomes a much bigger story in our minds. The amazing thing is that most of this happens automatically. We are usually not choosing to judge people. Our brain is making quick predictions before we even had the time to think carefully. The good news is that recognizing this is the first step towards becoming a better judge of people. Because once you know your first impression isn't always the full story, you become a little more willing to slow down. And I think that's something we all need to appreciate. We all need to practice. Here's another psychological idea that is really interesting. Psychologists often talk about something called slicing. Now, that sounds like an unusual term, but it is actually very easy to understand. Thin slicing is our brain ability to make quick judgments using only very few small amounts of information. Imagine watching a 5-second clip of someone speaking. Without realizing it, the brain starts making guesses. They seem confident, they look nervous, they seem friendly. Sometimes those guesses are surprisingly accurate, but sometimes they are not. They are completely wrong. Think of thin slicing as looking through a tiny keyhole. You can see part of the room, but you cannot see the whole picture. The problem begins when we mistake that small glimpse for the entire truth. And I think we've all done that at some point. Maybe someone didn't smile when they met you and you assumed they were rude. Later, you found out that they were having one of the worst days of their life when you met them. Or maybe someone spoke very confidently and you assumed they knew exactly what they were talking about. Then, you realize confidence and competence aren't always the same thing. That is why first impression can be helpful, but they should never be the final verdict. There's another mental shortcut that quietly shapes how we see people. Psychologists call it fundamental attribution error. I know that's a long name, but the idea is surprisingly simple. It means we often explain other people's behavior by blaming their personality, while explaining our own behavior by blaming the situation. You get that? For example, imagine someone cuts in front of your traffic. Your first thought might be, what a rude person. But if you accidentally cut in front of someone else, you might think, I didn't see them. I'm running late. It was an honest mistake. See the difference? When it's someone else, we judge the person. When it's our own, when it is us, we consider the circumstances. Our brains do this automatically, and most of us don't even notice it. Understanding this can make us a little more compassionate. The next time someone behaves in a way you don't like, it might be worth asking, is there something happening in their life that I can't see? That question doesn't excuse the bad behavior, but it reminds us that every person has a story we know very little about. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons psychology teaches us. People are more complicated than the first impression. One conversation rarely tells us who someone truly is. One mistake doesn't define a person's character. And one good first impression doesn't guarantee someone deserves your complete trust. Real understanding takes time. That is why the healthiest relationships are built on curiosity rather than assumptions. Curiosity asks, tell me more about yourself. I'd like to know more about you. Assumption says, I've already figured you out. One builds connection, the other often creates misunderstanding. So what can we do to become better at judging people? The first step is simple. Treat your first impression as a hypothesis, not as a conclusion. In other words, let it be your brain's first guess, not the final answer. Give people enough time to surprise you. Ask questions. Listen more than you assume. And be willing to change your opinion when the information arrives. That isn't a sign of weakness. Rather, it's a sign of wisdom. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with one good question. Think about someone you completely misjudged when you first met them. What changed your mind? Was it a conversation, an act of kindness, or simply spending more time together? I would love to hear your story in the comments, because I think we've all had moments like that. And if this conversation helped you understand your own mind a little better, I really appreciate it if you subscribe to Psychology Compass. Every week, we'll continue exploring psychology behind everyday thoughts and emotions and behaviors in a way that's simple, practical, and grounded in real psychology science. Because the more we understand how our mind works, the better we become at understanding the people around us. And maybe that's the real lesson today. The first impression isn't just the first page of someone's story. Before deciding how the story ends, give yourself the chance to read a few more chapters. Until next time, stay curious, because every behavior has a reason and every mind has a story. See you in the next video.